Let's begin with the foundations. Welcome to another lecture. Today we consider Primetime, an upcoming American biographical psychological crime thriller that dramatizes the early design and execution of a very particular television news magazine format, centered on sting houses and on-camera confrontations. In simpler terms, it is a film about how a risky idea became a cultural lightning rod, and how that process altered both television and public discourse. I am Alexei. I teach and research questions at the intersection of reason, design, and the sometimes unruly behavior of institutions. Today we will approach this film as a case study in media making under pressure.
Hi, I am Priyanka, the teaching assistant for this course, and I'll be asking the questions many of us are probably thinking as we listen.
To frame our discussion, Primetime is backed by A24 and directed by Lance Oppenheim in his narrative feature debut. The premise recreates the operational core of a television segment in which would-be offenders were lured to a controlled location, confronted by a host, and subsequently faced legal consequences. The film emphasizes process, editorial meetings, logistics, risk mitigation, and the ethics of televising human frailty at its darkest edges. It sits, therefore, at the precise juncture where journalism, entertainment, and criminal procedure contend with one another.
Maybe a few terms will help us all. A24 is an American company known for supporting distinctive films. The Venice International Film Festival is a major festival where films launch into awards conversations. Its top prize is the Golden Lion. A sting house is a controlled location used to draw in suspects under monitored conditions. And a theatrical first release means the film will play in cinemas before moving to streaming services. That should give us a shared vocabulary.
Moving forward, the stakes are non-trivial. It is important to understand that televised sting operations have long occupied a morally ambivalent zone. On one hand, there is a compelling public interest in deterrence and exposure. On the other hand, there are worries about due process, privacy, and whether confrontations crafted for broadcast risk converting social harm into spectacle. Primetime, by reconstructing the origins of this format, invites us to reconsider how we weigh those goods and harms in the present tense.
And audiences still argue about how we depict crime, who gets a voice, and how far stories move from rumor to video to judgment. All of that remains unstable territory.
On to our next point. The basic facts are these. Primetime is directed by Lance Oppenheim, financed and distributed by A24, with Ari Balousian composing a score that, we are told, threads procedural momentum with psychological unease. Robert Pattinson not only stars as Chris Hansen, the show's host figure, but also produces. He initially joined as a producer in October 2024, then took on the lead role. This dual capacity implies a performance aligned with the film's overall creative architecture. The ensemble includes Merritt Wever as Hansen's producer, Skylar Gisondo as Dan Plum, a young actor drawn into the mechanics of the stings, Phoebe Bridgers in a supporting role, Anna Faris as Mary Joan Hansen, Tony Revolori as a predator caught in a confrontation, and appearances by Matthew Marr, Bokeem Woodbine, Jonathan Lipnicki, Sean Bridgers, Creed Bratton, and Alex Winter. In a metatextual turn, Jeff Zucker appears as himself, foregrounding executive-level pressures that can shape editorial choices downstream.
Production began in early February 2025 in New Orleans under the working title Bluefin Tuna, which, to be honest, makes me hungry, and also very curious. Principal photography wrapped in March 2025. Skylar Gizondo's casting as Dan Plum became public in September 2025, so we learned more about the decoy side of the operation during post-production news.
Speaking of schedules, the world premiere is slated for September 2026 in the main competition at the 83rd Venice International Film Festival. A24 plans a U.S. theatrical release in late September 2026. 2 days earlier, in late September 2026, the film opens in France and Germany. Later, in October 2026, it continues to the Benelux. In India, Lionsgate Play has flagged the title for a theatrical first window in September 2026, complementing the cinema run with a subsequent streaming path. The sequencing is designed to harness festival momentum into a broader conversation. Before we get to the complexities, a brief personal note. We often underestimate how strongly format shapes perception. The same facts, arranged differently, can alter public intuitions, just as a chess opening conditions the middle game. I have long been fascinated by how media edits reality into narrative, and in so doing teaches us what to fear, what to forgive, and what to applaud. Primetime is, among other things, a film about that editorial teaching function.
So, yeah, moving on. Could we structure the rest around a few big questions, Professor?
This logically leads us to three distinct lines of inquiry. First, the historical ethics around televised stings. Second, a counterfactual about festival versus streaming launches. Third, present-day dilemmas in crime reporting, and how cinema might portray them responsibly.
Professor, may I ask something simple first? What were the ethical considerations during the early days of this sting-driven program that Primetime is dramatizing?
It is worth noting that from inception, the format balanced precariously on three fulcrums. First, privacy and dignity. While there is an evident public interest in deterrence and exposure, there are parallel concerns that broadcasting an encounter pre-conviction could preempt due process or magnify harm beyond what courts would impose. Second, safety and legality. Producers had to coordinate secure locations, clear lines with legal advisors, and establish protocols so that no one on set, crew, decoys, bystanders, was placed at undue risk. Third, editorial intent. When a host such as Chris Hansen confronts a subject on camera, the tone, the sequencing of questions, and whether the segment pauses for context, all shape whether audiences perceive journalism or spectacle. Historically, these considerations did not resolve neatly. They required case-by-case judgment under time pressure.
Professor Alexei, may I ask a follow-up? How did these ethical concerns influence the show's format choices in practice?
We observe several design consequences. The use of a sting house created a controlled environment with prearranged camera placement and a choreography of entrances and exits. This reduced variables that could escalate unpredictably. The reliance on decoys and sometimes young performers, much like the character Dan Plum in the film, placed a premium on rehearsed dialogue and clear safety briefings. Editorially, the format adopted a repetitive structure: arrival, reveal, confrontation, and handoff to authorities that standardized risk while escalating narrative tension. In simpler terms, ethical caution produced formal ritual. Ritual then produced ratings. The very repetition, however, risks sliding from information into sensational reinforcement, which is precisely the knife edge the film appears keen to examine.
To shift gears a bit. Suppose Primetime had skipped Venice and gone directly to streaming. Professor, how might its perception change?
Mathematically, if you remove a major festival premiere, you subtract the concentrating mechanism for critical attention and awards framing. A Venice main competition slot signals prestige and invites long-form criticism. It also confers a durable label that marketing can reuse. Laurels are a tidy semiotic device. A direct-to-streaming launch, by contrast, can be richly successful, but tends to diffuse conversation across algorithms and staggered viewership. In that alternative timeline, Primetime might be read more as a genre thriller and less as a work of record about media ethics, thereby narrowing awards prospects and tightening the window for serious debate.
And do you think that would change how audiences interpret the ethical questions? Would the discourse feel different on streaming?
Arguably, yes. Festivals and theatrical releases stage discourse. They create a shared clock. Critics, Q&A sessions, and staggered international rollouts, France and Germany in late September, the United States shortly thereafter, then the Benelux in October, produce waves of response that audiences can track. In a streaming-first context, the conversation is more asynchronous and more siloed by platform interface. Ethical inquiry thrives on context and counter-argument. A theater or a festival press line provides both. That is not to say streaming cannot sustain depth, only that its public square looks different, and in many cases more fragmented.
Building on that, Professor Alexei, what ethical challenges does media face today in crime reporting, especially with speed and technology changing everything?
This brings us to contemporary fault lines. First, velocity. Information now moves faster than verification, so editorial safeguards must be both rigorous and rapid. Second, amplification. Once an image or accusation circulates, its afterlife may persist beyond acquittals or corrections, creating second-order harms for families and communities. Third, incentive structures. Metrics can reward outrage and immediacy over nuance, which tempts formats toward spectacle, even when the underlying intent is public interest. Finally, boundary issues. Collaborations that are adjacent to law enforcement raise questions about independence, consent, and procedural fairness. None of these dilemmas has a universal solution. They require, as ever, principled design choices under constraint.
And in cinema, where we are recreating events rather than reporting them live, how can filmmakers be responsible without losing narrative momentum?
Several heuristics apply. Depict the process, not just the payoff. When we see protocols, disagreements, and trade-offs, we are less likely to confuse entertainment for endorsement. Prioritize informed consent for participants and avoid gratuitous reenactment of harm. Composite characters can protect privacy while preserving truthfulness. Make room for countervailing views on screen. The inclusion of an executive figure such as Jeff Zucker as himself can help illuminate top-down pressures without reducing complex decisions to caricature. Let the score, here by Ari Baluzian, accent psychological inquiry rather than sensationalism. And crucially, center the interiority of the people whose labor and judgment construct the format. Producers such as the one played by Merritt Weaver, so that audiences understand that ethical weight is borne by real, fallible humans.
It makes me wonder about casting choices. For example, Tony Revolori playing a predator is against type. That seems like a way to complicate our reflexes about who looks dangerous.
Clearly, casting against type can unsettle the audience's prior probabilities, which is pedagogically useful. It compels us to attend to conduct and context rather than to stereotype. Likewise, the presence of artists from other domains, Phoebe Bridgers, for instance, signals a porous boundary between media cultures, perhaps inviting a broader audience into a difficult conversation.
And then there is the wonderfully secretive working title, Bluefin Tuna. I feel like that alone tells us they cared about keeping the set quiet while recreating surprise-driven scenes.
Indeed, as it were, a fish that swims fast and avoids nets. Covert titles minimize leaks, streamline permits, and in this case, preserved the logic of controlled encounters staged in public-facing neighborhoods. That efficiency likely contributed to the compact shoot from early February through March 2025, indicative of a production that is performance-forward and meticulously pre-planned.
Professor, one more quick practical question. With Robert Pattinson also producing, does that tend to make a difference on set or in the final tone?
To some extent, yes. When the lead actor is also in the producing consortium, here alongside figures such as Ari Aster, the performance and the film's tonal envelope are often more tightly coupled. We can infer a shared intention about how far to push tension, how to register ambiguity, and when to withhold catharsis. In a film about ethical brinkmanship, that cohesion can be the difference between provocation and mere provocation for its own sake. In conclusion, Primetime is best understood as a biographical psychological crime thriller about the making of a controversial television format. It blends real-world newsroom process with the pulse of a thriller. We explored 3 questions. Historically, the format's ethics revolved around privacy, safety, and editorial intent. Counterfactually, a streaming-first launch would likely have altered its prestige framing and compressed its public square. And today's media faces unresolved tensions among speed, amplification, and independence, which cinema can responsibly depict by foregrounding process, consent, and counterpoint.
For those who want more, consider studying films like Spotlight, The Social Network, or Nightcrawler, each in a different way examining media power and its consequences. And, of course, keep an eye on Venice in September 2026, and the theatrical dates later that month and into October.
This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Until next time.